So, welcome to your next project, which is Sculpture Project 5, Connection. For Connection, we're going to be combining multiples of the same object to create something new. In this project, you are going to be working a bit more abstractly as opposed to the last project where you're trying to make something representational, aka a portrait of someone that you admire. In this project, you are going to create an abstract shape or object. So it'll be something that is not representational of an existing thing. But you are going to use multiples of something recognizable. You will see artists in this presentation that work both in representation and abstraction, but I think it'll become clear by the end what the difference is. So for this first artist, we're looking at is this is Brian Youngin. And Brian Youngin is an artist. He's a Canadian artist of both European and Indigenous descent. And in 2000, he began noticing that all of these broken white molded plastic patio chairs were being left out for trash on curbsides. And at the time, he says he was reading about the history of whaling and everything kind of clicked for him. And I was fortunate to meet him and see his work at the Henry Art Gallery several years ago when he was working on this series. The Henry Art Gallery has one of these pieces. He built one of these whale skeletons for them. And he has built two others in addition to that one. So we're going to watch a video of him talking about his work, and then we'll see a few more pieces afterwards.
I didn't grow up on the coast. I really like being by the ocean, but I like to go visit it and then go away again. When I lived on the coast, I was very influenced by the artwork of the First Nations on the coast. And I was interested in how something very specific, like the coastal motifs and imagery, moved to being something that was really associated with the whole province. I had heard that the last killer whale was leaving the Vancouver Aquarium, so I wanted to go film her. And that's when I kind of stumbled upon what used to be a big industry, the whaling industry on the West Coast. The imagery of the whale was pretty widespread across maritime native cultures. When I made the first one, all that kind of came together. Working with those chairs, I left enough clues that people could tell what they were. You can buy those chairs anywhere, and they're cheap. Kind of switch that happens as the spark, right? It gets people interested. If you ask any native Indian person, where are you from? They wouldn't really say the city they happen to be living in. They would say where their blood relations are. I'm Daneza, so that is a very specific part of the country. But I moved to Vancouver when I was 18 to go to art school. And that was the first time I lived in a city. I love the opportunities and the culture around you when you're in a city, but I prefer to live out here. It's nice to see all the sage blooming, eh? My childhood was spent on a really large cattle ranch. So when I was a little kid, I would spend a lot of time out in the forest with the dogs. They were kind of like my guardians. Ed's a northern Alberta mutt. He's the boss of this place in some ways. Like, we all listen to Ed. So yeah, that's across the road there. Those pastures are part of the property. And up there in the hillside. And up there too. My ancestors were promised they could either live on reserve or they would be given land. But none of it was honored. When I started working with shoes in the 90s, I went into Nike Town. They had sneakers of theirs in glass vitrines, and I thought that was so strange. I started to make connections between the commodification of those shoes and the same thing that's happened to native art. And then there was just a kind of a strange coincidence that the color schemes and designs look very similar to Northwest Coast masks. There was this kind of illicit thrill I got by buying these Air Jordans and like immediately starting to kind of cut them up and stuff. So, yeah, and that was my first kind of foray into making objects. I'm a pretty quiet person. I was kind of raised in around cowboy culture, so there's a lot of aggression, but it's not really how I approach the world. That's right, attaboy. So I didn't have much access to culture growing up in the north, so I had like one television station, AM radio kind of thing. My folks died when I was 7, so I just kind of like buried myself in my imagination. I used to make artwork because I thought I could hide behind it. And that turned out not to be the case. My artwork became so tied up with my identity, especially as Native Canadian, that it was almost impossible to talk about my artwork without my identity. Uncle of mine showed me how to make drums years ago, and I'm not a very good musician, but whenever I'm home, like, my cousins will kind of thrust a drum at me to, like, participate, and it's great. I love it. But I wanted to make some of my own. I've always also really liked modern furniture. So I kind of used those chairs to make these drums, give them a life other than the utilitarian furniture, right? Kind of give them a voice. Yeah, I like vehicles. I have a nice Impala now. It's my summer car, really. I cruise around in that. When I was an adolescent and into my 20s, I had to figure out who I was and kind of come out of the closet. But that's really not an issue anymore. I think gay culture is kind of mainstream. And I never really fit into that stereotype anyways. My family are hunters. It's very common in Canada. But a lot of my family have freezers to keep moose meat in, and a lot of the times they're outside. I was visiting family, and I started making these temporary sculptures and sticking them on top of the freezers because they were like the perfect pedestal. And I liked kind of seeing that, like, some people would just, they thought, oh, like, who put all this crap on here? And other people, they would look at it and say, oh, that's an artwork, right? So I decided to take that into the studio. I like using things people can recognize that they see around them every day. This new series I just started, it's going to be shown in Vancouver in January. I wanted to revisit the material. It's been about 10 years, and I wanted to do it in a new way. When I first made them, I was just kind of slowly taking them apart, piece by piece, and now I'm much more fluid with it. Oh, these are like kind of horns. I work very intuitively. We just tighten everything up and then start cutting and see what happens. I don't have an idea of what it's going to look like in my head, so it'll be finished when it feels finished. You know, I always say to myself, I'm not going to work like this anymore, and things are going to be done weeks ahead of the opening, but I guess a part of me still likes the kind of intensity of working down the wire.
This will be attached? Have you figured out how that's going to...
No.
No.
Really.
No.
So, yeah.
Well, and hope for the best.
I wanted to make these ones more abstract. I think when I made the first ones, I was interested in referencing them to what people thought Native art is. Now, I've kind of moved away from that. And some of these just feel like 20th century modern sculpture. I'm involved in a contemporary art community that is very exclusive. I don't know, there's all different sorts of art worlds. There's a whole Native American art world. I kind of have a bit of a hand in that. If I hadn't gone to art school, if my parents hadn't died, I probably would have wound up working on the family farm and making art in secret.
So as you saw in the video, his early works were what got him to be a well-known artist, and that was taking Nike Air Jordans and cutting them apart and reconstructing them or transforming them into sculptures that resemble Northwest Coast masks and Plains Indian headdresses. He also is starting to work now even more abstractly. And if you, this is a 2018 piece called Understanding the Light in All Directions. And he has returned to working with Air Jordans in some of these newer pieces. Here you have Warrior 1, which is the soles of a lot of different shoes, most likely the Nike brand, connected to form this sort of explosive piece. And this will not be all right, from 2016. And here you see the pieces of the shoe connected together to form a wall piece. Our next artist, Evan Blackwell, is also or is a local artist, or he works in the Northwest. He is a professor at Evergreen and someone that I went to school with at the University of Washington years ago. He works with everyday objects and repurposes them to create things that transform them and sort of question our idea of the familiar. So very familiar things that we're hearing, just like our last artist, Noah Scalin, where he's taking everyday objects and making us see them in new ways. These are drinking straws that were most likely melted together. Not the best practice for you. You need to, in order to melt plastic, you need to have proper ventilation and proper supervision, so that you're not hurting yourself or putting anybody at risk. But you could use hot glue, if you have that, to make something like this, or even tape or bind them together with some of our materials. Here you have something from his Warwork series, and this is called Army Mandala, and he has taken the little green army figures. They're very common in toy sets, and he has attach them together to create this mandala-like form. Nick Cave is a Chicago-based artist who makes something called sound suits. He is a performer and an artist. So often he'll even create these suits and perform in them, or have performers do some kind of event where they're out dancing or activating them. The Seattle Art Museum had a really wonderful large exhibition of this work, and I believe it was 2010. And as you can see, it has everything from connecting sewing dollies together, like doilies, like that you crochet or knit, to sticks, to fur. He's even had things where it's like little bird figurines that are all welded together as a sort of cage-like outfit that creates a suit. So we're going to watch a video of Nick Cave talking about his work.
Cranbrook Academy of Art is where I did my graduate studies. It was a bit shocking, I think, at the beginning, because I was the only minority there. This is in 1988. I just considered myself another artist out there amongst my peers. And I think it was difficult because it was the first time that I was confronted with my identity as a black male. My mother told me when I was like 8 years old the complexity of what I would have to deal with. So knowing made me think I've got to build a thick skin. I've got to be able to operate in a world that could work against me as opposed to for me. What do I do with that? I have been racially profiled. I'm walking home with my portfolio from teaching. I am surrounded by undercut cops saying lie down on the floor because the convenience store was robbed down the street. That has been my reality. Get it together up here. Psychologically, I have to really get it together. And I just have to get quiet to put it in perspective and to sort of not lash out in rage. And if I do, lashing out for me is creating this. All of that becomes the impulse to create. I don't ever see the sound suits as fun. They really are coming from a very dark place. The sound suits hide gender, race, class, and they force you to look at the work without judgment. You know, we tend to want to categorize everything. We tend to want to find its place. How do we sort of be one-on-one with something that is unfamiliar?
Ellen Etsui is a artist who was born in Ghana in 1944. And then in 1964, when he began his studies, many parts of Africa were experiencing a cultural renaissance associated with decolonization movements. In 1975, Etsui joined faculty at the University of Nigeria. And this was a very vibrant creative capital for African artists and writers in the 1970s. They were reviving traditional art forms, but the way Etsui differed from this group is that he really held on to the idea of abstraction. So often his work is referred to in with the language of textiles. These are bottle caps that have been fastened together with copper wire attached corner to corner. But he purposely disregards the limited categories imposed by Western art history, and he embraces a more expanded understanding of what art can be, ignoring the distinctions between fine art and craft. So we're going to watch a video where he creates his work, and we're going to go to a studio where he has people that help him build his artwork.
The studio is located in the university town of Nsukka in southeastern Nigeria. It's about 10-20 minutes by walking north of the university campus. There are times that I come in unexpectedly, and then I'll park my car elsewhere and walk in, and you hear there's a lot of, how do you call it now, banter. Yeah, very loud banter. And when I go in, then they all keep quiet. Yeah, because I always demand that there should be absolute silence or as much silence as possible. Because I try to impress upon them that a studio is a sacred place that you come to do some bit of reflection and thinking. For each new, say, pattern or texture that I'm introducing, I have to show them how it's done. Because I find that as an artist, if you don't maintain physical contact with handling the material, for instance, the work might end up not having a soul. Okay, so silver on the line there. Put silver on the line there. First of all, they have to do the units. We call them blocks. And a block can consist of maybe 200 and something bottle caps together, you know. And so you take these units and then start playing around with them. Then that's when you now have to lay all of them out, scatter them in the studio, and then start picking uh, what you need for each portion of the work. They put them together in a bunch and you try to see what it can suggest. Okay, we will rearrange into blocks. Starting from there, if it's something that you feel it's interesting or something effective, then you have started a new idea. You just play around, shift around, and at times for days you can just keep shifting things around and taking photographs of them and putting them on the computer. And so I have a lot of images on my computer. In course of time, I could go back and just keep looking at this. You need to have a large bank of images, of effects, of textures, you know, that I can always refer to, and they could trigger off new ideas. Because ideas do come at very unusual times.
This is Tom Friedman. He creates sculptures also out of everyday materials. And since 1990, he's worked with commonplace household items such as toothpaste, cubes of sugar, cereal boxes, Pepto-Bismol, and even lifesavers. And he painstakingly attaches these and reforms them together in ways that create something new. So what you have on the top left-hand corner is a whole box of spaghetti that he has taken and attached end to end to create a complete loop. The same is true with the piece on the right, although it is out of pencils, little pieces of pencils that he's cut apart and attached together. So this piece actually is one, if you were to pull it out, stretch it all out, it would be one big loop of pencil. The piece on the bottom left is toothpicks that he has glued together to create this starburst. On the left, you have box tops, or corners of boxes that are glued together to form this new object. And on the right, you have something representational, which are sugar cubes attached together to form a portrait of the artist. I'm not familiar with Christy Severin's work, but when I was looking for examples for this project of things that you might have around the house, I thought this was an excellent example. This is Q-tips that I believe she's dipped in different kinds of makeup and then attached together in the center. For that attachment in the middle, you could, if you had glue, you could just, if you're a very patient person, just slowly gluing them in together. But you might also have something sticky like gum or some sort of blob that you can create. Dough would be a great, if you had a ball of dough that you could just stick them in to create this object. There are lots of ideas online that you can find if you're still struggling with this project. If you have a box full or a jar full of buttons, if you or someone in your house is a fiber artist and or a sewer and has a lot of buttons, you could take buttons and string them together and create something beautiful that either hangs or is a pile on the table or is something that hangs on the wall. You could glue bottle caps to cardboard or paper or some other flat surface and have something that is a relief like we did before. You could take crayons and either take pins and push the pins through them to connect them together, use hot glue to form them on top of each other, or even wrap them with wire so that they are somehow connected to each other in an interesting way. The image on the left are feathers. So when you amass a lot of feathers and you turn them up on their side, you can create something that looks very new or different. Or on the right, we have matches, and matches that have been glued side by side and turned into this sort of vessel-like object. Common things like pencils. You might not find that you just don't have 100 pencils lying around the house. You also might not have a saw, but there's still plenty of things you can do with pencils, and you'll do your best to amass a large amount of the object. So if you don't make 100, let's say you have 26, make do with what you have. Also, don't forget the things that are even more forgotten than the objects that we take for granted. Things like pencil shavings, just like bottle caps, or these things that we throw out they're the byproduct of something else, and sometimes massed together and formed into a different way, such as a sphere, can create a completely new way to look at and a completely new object to appreciate. So your project 5 connection, you're going to create a sculpture connecting 100 of a similar object together to create something new. Get as close to the 100 goal as you can, but do not let that number hold you back. Don't forget that outside you also have things too, like rocks, leaves, blades of grass. There's lots of places that you can find multiples, but don't let the 100 goal be something that that if you can't reach that number, that's okay. Do your best. Figure out what resources you have for the objects you do find, and figure out what you have to connect them, and let those two things dictate what you do. So some suggested methods for connecting things together are sewing them together, stapling them together, nailing them to a board, hot gluing them together or hot gluing them to a surface, pasting them together or to a surface, using wire to wrap them together, using wire to connect them, just how Ella Sui did with little holes, and using basically creating jump rings, using gum to stick them together, which is totally gross, but could work. Or as I was discussing earlier, even dough or some other sort of sticky, flexible surface, flexible medium. You could freeze them together. It will be a temporary sculpture, but remember, this sculpture is living on in photographic form, so it does not have to be permanent. You can drill a hole through them and stack them on a pole, or just do something that new that you think up. There are lots of ways to do it. And also, if you are having troubles where you have an idea but you maybe don't know how to sew, or don't know how to, or having trouble figuring out how to glue something and have it stay, feel free to email me. And also remember that the internet is a vast resource of people, especially on YouTube. There are people that will teach you how to do just about anything. But feel free to reach out to me with questions, and remember to upload a photo of your finished project to our website by either Monday, May 4th or Tuesday, May 5th, depending on if you are in an odd or an even block. I look forward to seeing what you make, and have fun.